Thanks for tuning in to Crazy Mango Stories. Give a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell for more betrayal stories. The night was too quiet when I stepped into the house. Normally, Sarah would be on the couch, waiting for me, pretending not to care about the clock. But tonight, something felt off. It hit me right as I crossed the threshold. Her perfume lingered in the air, mixed with a scent I didn't recognize. I couldn't place it, but it wasn't hers, that much I knew. The living room looked fine at first glance, but I noticed subtle changes. A glass on the coffee table that hadn't been there when I left, some pillows misplaced on the couch, and the faintest trace of muddy footprints leading toward the stairs. I froze, my FBI-trained mind switching into investigation mode, but this wasn't some case file to solve. This was my life, my marriage, and I wasn't about to jump to conclusions without evidence. I walked into the kitchen. No dinner on the stove, no leftover takeout boxes. Sarah had always been terrible at cooking, so we usually ordered in when I came home late. I looked around, feeling a gnawing suspicion, but forced myself to stay calm. Then I saw a man's leather jacket slung over the back of one of the kitchen chairs. Not mine. I reached out, touching the smooth fabric. Something tightened in my chest. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. Something was seriously wrong. I couldn't stand still. The sight of that leather jacket sent a wave of nausea rolling through my gut. It was one thing to suspect, but another to see cold, hard evidence. I stood there for what felt like minutes, staring at it, trying to piece together where it had come from. Was I overreacting? Could it belong to one of Sarah's friends? No. I'd never seen it before, and I knew all of her friends. That jacket was too big, too masculine. My mind was racing, running through scenarios, excuses, anything to keep me from confronting what I knew deep down. I grabbed my phone and walked upstairs, my legs heavy, dreading what I might find. The hall was dark, and as I reached the bedroom, I noticed the door was slightly ajar. I paused, listening. The house was dead silent. I pushed the door open gently, my heart pounding in my chest. The bedroom looked untouched, no sign of chaos, no sign of her. The bed was made like she hadn't been in it all day. Then my eyes fell on her phone lying on the nightstand, still plugged in. Sarah never left her phone unattended. She was attached to it, always texting or scrolling through social media. I picked it up, thumb hovering over the lock screen. We trusted each other, or at least I thought we did, so I'd never had a reason to invade her privacy before. But now things had changed. I knew her passcode, of course I did. After a quick breath, I tapped it in, feeling guilty and justified all at once. Nothing popped up immediately, no glaring signs of infidelity, no incriminating text messages or missed calls. But then I noticed something odd. Her recent call history had been wiped. Not a single number in the log. That was strange. Sarah always had her call history full, mostly with her friends or our neighbors. Why would she delete them? My mind drifted back to the man's jacket downstairs. The idea that this was all in my head started to fade. I set the phone down and opened the closet, eyes darting over her clothes. The familiar sight of her dresses, jeans, and tops greeted me, but I noticed a new dress hanging in the corner. I reached for it, pulling it out gently. It was sleek, black, far more revealing than anything Sarah would wear on her own. A little red tag hung from the sleeve. She hadn't even taken it out for a spin yet, but that didn't matter. So I knew why she had it. It felt like I was losing my grip on reality. I stuffed the dress back in the closet and moved quickly to the window, peering outside. My truck was the only vehicle in the driveway, but parked just down the street was a car I didn't recognize. A sleek black sedan. Someone had been here, or still was. I bolted back downstairs, my pulse thudding in my ears. Whoever owned that car couldn't be far. If they were stupid enough to leave something as obvious as a jacket behind, they'd be stupid enough to think I wouldn't notice their car. I headed straight for the door, grabbing the handle just as I heard it. The faintest creak of the back door. Every hair on my neck stood up. I wasn't alone. I spun around, eyes scanning the house. The back door was partially open, swinging slightly in the wind. I hadn't come in that way. My instincts were screaming now this wasn't just some lover's tryst anymore. There was something more at play, something more dangerous. I slowly stepped toward the door, my training kicking in. Quiet. Measured. I didn't want to spook whoever was there. As I approached, I saw her. Sarah stood outside, her back to me, phone pressed to her ear. She was talking to someone, but her voice was low, and I couldn't make out the words. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to charge out and demand answers. My mind raced back to the jacket, the deleted call history, the dress. This wasn't just about some affair, was it? Suddenly, Sarah turned around, her eyes widening when she saw me. "Jacob," she stammered, lowering the phone. "Who are you talking to?" I asked, my voice steady, though my blood boiled underneath. "No one, just a friend." She stepped back slightly, her eyes darting around nervously. A friend? I repeated, stepping out onto the patio, who left their jacket in our kitchen. Her face paled, and I knew in that moment everything was about to unravel. She hadn't expected me to catch on, hadn't thought I'd put the pieces together so fast. But this was more than just infidelity, there was something else, and I was determined to find out exactly what. Who is he, Sarah? And don't lie to me. I could feel the tension crackling between us. She knew she was cornered. She opened her mouth, hesitated, then closed it again. I could see the fear in her eyes. Jacob, it's not what you think. Then tell me what it is, I demanded. But deep down, I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Sarah's silence was louder than any confession she could have made. The tension in the air between us was thick, unbearable. She shifted her weight uncomfortably, eyes darting from me to the door, as if considering escape. But there was nowhere to run. Not now. Not after everything I'd pieced together in the last half hour. I asked you a question, I said, voice low, controlled, but with an edge sharp enough to cut. Who is he, Sarah? And don't feed me some bullshit about just a friend. You know I'm not stupid. She swallowed hard, and for a second, I saw her mask slip. There was real fear in her eyes, fear I wasn't used to seeing in her. Sarah was strong, a fighter. This wasn't a woman caught in some innocent lie. No, this was something deeper, something darker. And I couldn't shake the growing suspicion that it wasn't just our marriage at stake anymore. It's complicated, she finally muttered, barely meeting my gaze. I let out a bitter laugh. Complicated? Try me. I'm pretty good at solving puzzles, remember? I took a step closer, my heart pounding in my chest, waiting for her to crack. Her lips trembled as she spoke. His name is Tom. He's someone I met a while ago. We've been talking. But it's not what you think. She kept her voice soft, like she was trying to control the explosion she knew was coming. Talking? My tone was ice cold. Sarah, talking doesn't explain why his jacket is in our kitchen or why you're sneaking around with him. She flinched to the accusation but didn't deny it. Her silence was damning. I ran my hands through my hair, trying to stay calm, but every part of me was shaking with rage. This was my life unraveling, and she was acting like it was just some casual slip-up, like it could be brushed aside with a few apologies and some tears. But I knew better. You've been deleting your call history. I know you've been erasing texts. So don't stand there and tell me you've just been talking. Her face crumpled, guilt finally settling over her like a heavy weight. It's not just about me, Jacob. It's about you too. You're never here. You're always on some case, always somewhere else. That was a low blow, and she knew it. I'm working to keep this family safe, Sarah. Or have you forgotten what I do for a living? My voice cracked, the anger and pain mixing into a dangerous cocktail of emotions. Or do you have any idea what could happen if I lose focus for even a second? If I'm not fully present at my job? And you think the stakes are just about our marriage? This is bigger than you and me. I know, she whispered, but there was something off in the way she said it. That's the problem. The problem? I repeated, taking another step forward. What are you talking about? She bit her lip, looking down at the ground as if the weight of her secret was finally too much to bear. Then she glanced back at the house, as if afraid someone was watching. My skin prickled with paranoia. Jacob, this isn't just about an affair. It's about your work. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. What are you saying, Sarah? I didn't mean for it to go this far, she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. Tom isn't just some guy, he's connected to people. People who know things. About your cases. About the FBI. About you. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. My breath caught in my throat as I tried to process what she was saying. My wife, the woman I had trusted with everything, was somehow involved with someone who had access to sensitive information. You've been leaking information, I said, the realization crashing down on me like a tidal wave. You've been feeding him information about my work. She shook her head quickly, but her eyes gave her away. No, not like that. I never gave him anything important. Just bits and pieces. Things you'd mention. I didn't think it would matter, Jacob, I swear. But then it got out of hand, and I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. This wasn't just betrayal, it was treason. My mind raced through the implications. Every time I'd come home exhausted, venting to Sarah about a case, every offhand comment I made about a suspect or a lead, she had been listening. And worse, she had been feeding it to him, Tom, whoever the hell he was. You have no idea what you've done, I whispered, my hands shaking as I clenched them into fists. Or do you even know who this guy really is? Do you know what kind of people he's working with? She was crying now, sobbing quietly, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. I was too far gone. I didn't know, Jacob, I didn't think. That's the problem, Sarah. You didn't think. My voice rose, filled with rage and panic. You could have destroyed everything. My job, our lives, hell, you could have put us both in danger. She collapsed into the patio chair, covering her face with her hands. I didn't mean for this to happen. I stood there staring at her, trying to calm the storm inside me, but there was no calm. There was no going back from this. I stood there staring at Sarah as she crumbled before me, sobbing into her hands. The weight of her betrayal hung heavy in the air, but this wasn't just about her infidelity anymore. No, this was far worse. She had compromised my work, my career, hell, maybe even my life. And now she was sitting there, crying, as if that would fix anything. The night felt colder, the quiet suburban atmosphere suffocating. I couldn't shake the thought that this whole thing went deeper than just a man sneaking into my house while I was away. Sarah had gotten herself involved in something far beyond what she understood. And I was standing in the middle of it, realizing how close I was to the edge of something catastrophic. So what exactly did you tell him? I asked, my voice barely steady. I had to know, I had to understand the depth of her betrayal. I didn't tell him much, Sarah whispered through her tears, her voice shaking. Just things you mentioned in passing. You know how you talk about work sometimes, after a bad day. I clenched my jaw, trying to hold back the anger threatening to explode. I talk about work to you because I trust you, Sarah. You're my wife. And you've been feeding him information? Even bits and pieces could be enough to wreck an entire case. Do you have any idea what that means? She looked up at me, her face pale and streaked with tears. I didn't think it was that serious, she muttered, the words sounding hollow. I didn't know, Jacob. I thought he just wanted to know about you. About us. I laughed bitterly, pacing in front of her. About us. Is that what you really believe? Or is that just what you told yourself to make it okay? Did you ever stop to think that this isn't about your little affair? This is about national security. This is about the people I protect, the cases I'm working on. You could have put lives at risk, Sarah. I didn't mean for it to get this far, she whispered, looking down at the ground again, unable to meet my gaze. I stopped pacing and stared at her, my heart pounding in my chest. Tell me everything. Now. She took a deep, shaky breath and wiped her eyes. It started small, she said, her voice barely audible. Tom, he seemed interested in you. At first, it was just normal questions, how you were doing, how work was. I thought he was just curious because I was venting about how you were always away. But then, after a while, he started asking for more details. He'd push me to ask about your cases, the people you were tracking. I shook my head in disbelief. And you just told him. You didn't think to stop and wonder why some random guy was so interested in what I do. She flinched at the accusation. I didn't think it was a big deal. He was charming, Jacob. He made it sound like he was just being supportive, like he wanted to understand what it was like for me. Being married to someone who's always gone. That's how they get to you, I muttered, my anger boiling just below the surface. They manipulate you, Sarah. They find your weakness and exploit it. She started crying again, but this time I didn't care. I didn't reach out to comfort her. I needed answers, not tears. He asked about one of your cases, she continued through sobs. The one you were working on a few months ago, the trafficking ring. I didn't tell him much, just that you were frustrated because it was stalling. I didn't think it would matter. He made it sound like he just wanted to know how stressful your job was. I froze. The trafficking case. That had been a delicate, high-profile operation. And we'd been tracking a syndicate that stretched across state lines, with leads going cold just as quickly as we uncovered them. If she'd given Tom anything about that case, even the smallest detail, it could have blown the whole investigation. And what did he do with the information? I asked, my voice low, barely controlled. Did you ever ask yourself why he wanted to know? She shook her head, her sobs growing louder. I didn't know, Jacob. I swear, I thought he just cared about me. I didn't realize. Didn't realize what? I shouted, the anger I'd been holding back finally erupting. That you were being played? That you were being used to get to me? Jesus, Sarah, do you know how dangerous this is? She flinched at my outburst, looking up at me with wide, terrified eyes. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't know. I didn't think it was this serious. I stepped back, running my hands through my hair, trying to think. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about my job, my reputation. Hell, it could be about my safety. If Tom was using her to get to me, who else was involved? How far did this go? I turned back to her, my mind spinning. You need to tell me everything, Sarah. Every single detail, every conversation you had with him. Because this isn't over. Not by a long shot. If he's been using you to get information, we need to shut this down now. She nodded weakly, wiping her tears away. I'll tell you everything. I swear. Just please don't hate me. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because right now, hate was the only thing I felt. Sarah sat there, trembling, her tear-streaked face illuminated by the faint glow of the kitchen light. spilling out onto the patio. She looked like a stranger to me, someone I barely recognized. My partner had crossed a line I never thought she would. And now, the weight of that betrayal crushed any remnants of trust I had left. I felt like I was suffocating in the very home I'd built with her. I took a step back, trying to collect my thoughts, but it was impossible. Rage, fear, betrayal, they all swirled together in my head, making it hard to think straight. I had to get control of the situation to figure out how deep this went before it destroyed everything. "Start talking," I said, my voice cold, my gaze locked on hers. "Tell me everything." And I mean everything. No more lies, no more half-truths. Sarah wiped at her eyes, her breath hitching as she tried to calm herself. "I didn't mean for this to happen, Jacob. You have to believe me." I thought I was just venting. He seemed interested in how hard things were for S, how difficult it was being married to someone in the FBI. "Don't," I snapped, cutting her off. "Don't try to make this about me being gone for work. This isn't about me, it's about you. You let him into our lives, you compromised my job." Her lip trembled, but she nodded, knowing she couldn't argue with the truth. "It started out small, like I said. He asked about you, about your cases, and I didn't think much of it at first. But then he started asking for specifics, things that weren't public. He said he was just curious, that he was fascinated by law enforcement work. I didn't think it would lead to anything. I could feel my pulse racing, my fists clenching at my sides. "What specific, Sarah? What did you tell him?" She hesitated for a moment, biting her lip. "I mentioned the trafficking case you were working on. He kept asking how close you were to a breakthrough. And I didn't know how to avoid the questions. So I told him it was slow, that there were problems with the investigation, that the leads were going cold." My heart sank. That case was critical. It wasn't just another investigation, it involved a human trafficking ring that spanned across several states, and we were finally making progress after months of dead ends. If she had given him even a small piece of information about that case, it could have jeopardized everything. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I asked, my voice low but filled with fury. "That case, you could have gotten people killed. People who were counting on us to protect them." Sarah looked up at me, her eyes wide with fear. "I didn't know, Jacob. I swear I didn't know it was that serious." I turned away from her, pacing the patio as I tried to think. This wasn't just a domestic betrayal anymore. This was something much bigger, much darker. And it wasn't just about her affair with this guy, it was about the information she'd leaked. Information that could be used against me, against the FBI, against innocent people. "Who the hell is this guy?" I demanded, spinning around to face her again. "What's his real story? And don't tell me he's just some interested guy." As Sarah swallowed hard, her face paling. "He said his name was Tom, but I don't think that's his real name. He never gave me much about himself. I tried to ask, but he always deflected. He said it wasn't important." "Jesus, Sarah," I muttered under my breath. "You're telling me you've been feeding information to a man you know nothing about?" She nodded miserably. "It was stupid. I know that now, but by the time I realized it, it was too late. He was already asking for more, and I felt trapped." My mind raced. Who was this guy? If Sarah had been feeding him information, there was a good chance he wasn't just some random lover. He was someone with an agenda, someone who had targeted her, and by extension, me for a reason. And that reason was tied directly to my work. "Did he threaten you?" I asked suddenly, stepping closer to her. "Did he ever hint at blackmail or coercion?" She shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "No, he never threatened me. He made it sound like it was all harmless. That he was just interested in hearing about the life of an FBI agent's wife." I clenched my fists, trying to suppress the urge to punch something. I couldn't afford to lose control now, not when there was so much at stake. "You said he's connected to people," I pressed. "What kind of people?" Sarah looked away, her eyes flickering with shame. "I don't know, Jacob. He mentioned contacts, friends who could help with certain things. He made it sound like he had people who owed him favors, like he could make things happen. Did you ever meet anyone else through him?" "No," she answered quickly. "It was always just him, but I think he had people keeping tabs on me, on us. He always seemed to know things. About where I was, what I was doing." A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't just some casual fling. This was a setup. I was being watched, monitored, manipulated, and Sarah had been the key to their plan. I leaned in closer, my voice tight with urgency. "Listen to me. If there's anything more you need to tell me now. Because if you don't, it's not just going to be our marriage on the line. It's going to be my career, my life. Do you understand?" Sarah nodded, trembling as she wiped at her eyes. I'll tell you everything. I promise. But deep down, I wasn't sure if I wanted to hear the rest. The weight of Sarah's promise to tell me everything hung in the air like a storm cloud. I had no idea how much worse it could get, but I braced myself for the worst. I needed her to lay it all out, every detail, every secret. My mind was racing, but I couldn't afford to lose focus now. She sat up straighter in the chair, wiping the last remnants of her tears. Her eyes darted around as if she were trying to find the right words, or maybe just the courage to speak them. I could see the guilt, the fear, but also a deep-rooted sense of inevitability in her expression. Now, whatever she was about to tell me next wasn't just going to shake our marriage, it was going to destroy it. I should have told you this sooner, she began, her voice fragile but steady. I should have come to you when things started getting strange. Strange? I echoed, not sure I wanted to know what she meant by that. She nodded, taking a deep breath. It wasn't just the conversations, Jacob. Things started happening, small things at first. I get these strange texts from numbers I didn't recognize, asking vague questions about where I was or if I was alone. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. And you didn't think to tell me about that. You just let it happen? I didn't want to make a big deal out of nothing, she said quickly. At the time, it felt like a coincidence, or maybe spam. But then, Tom started showing up in places he shouldn't have known I'd be. I'd go to the grocery store, and suddenly he'd be there. I'd take a walk, and he'd just appear. He'd always brush it off as a coincidence, but I started to get this feeling. What kind of feeling? I asked, my throat tight. That I was being watched. She paused, her gaze dropping to her hands, which were clenched tightly in her lap. It got worse. I'd be home alone and the doorbell would ring, but no one was there. Or I'd find things moved around the house, small things like my keys or my phone, but enough to make me notice. I thought I was losing my mind. A knot formed in my stomach. This was escalating into something far more sinister than I had imagined. Why didn't you tell me, Sarah? Why didn't you come to me when this started happening? She looked up at me, her eyes wide and pleading. Because I was afraid, Jacob. Afraid that if I told you the truth, you'd leave me. I was terrified of what would happen if you knew everything. You should have been afraid of what would happen if you didn't tell me. I snapped, unable to hold back my frustration. You put us both in danger by keeping this from me. You let it go too far. I know, she whispered, her voice breaking. I know I did. But by the time I realized how deep I was in, it was too late. Tom, he started asking for more. He started pushing me for details about your work specifics. He wanted to know about the people you were tracking, the operations you were involved in. I felt the blood drain from my face. This wasn't just some casual interest in my career. This was someone actively gathering intelligence on FBI operations, using my wife to do it. What exactly did you tell him? I demanded, my voice barely a whisper. I tried to keep it vague, she said, her voice trembling again. I didn't give him much, I swear. But he's smart, Jacob. He'd ask me things in a way that made me feel like it wasn't a big deal, like it was just casual conversation. He'd ask about your mood after certain meetings or how long you were gone on certain trips. He'd ask about people's names, but never directly. It was always like he was piecing it together from bits I gave him. I clenched my fists, the anger boiling inside me like molten lava. So you were feeding him everything, even if you didn't realize it. Jesus, Sarah, this guy was playing you from the start. I know, she whispered. I see that now, but back then, I just thought he cared about me. And I thought he wanted to know what it was like being married to you. I didn't see the bigger picture. I felt a surge of disgust, not just at her, but at the entire situation. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. This was about the fact that my own wife had unwittingly become a tool for someone working against me. And if she had told this Tom character anything useful, it could have catastrophic consequences. Did he ever ask for specifics on any operations? Names of people involved? I pressed, my heart hammering in my chest. She shook her head quickly. No, never directly. But there was this one time he asked about the people you met with during the trafficking case. He wanted to know if you had any key informants. I didn't give him names, Jacob, I swear. I just said you were frustrated because the leads weren't panning out. But then, a week later, I heard you mention that an informant had gone missing. My heart nearly stopped. The missing informant, Lewis. He had been a key figure in helping us track down one of the trafficking syndicate's operations. He disappeared without a trace, and we had assumed he'd gone underground. But now, hearing this, Sarah, I said, my voice barely controlled. You've put lives at risk. You've put my life at risk. I'm sorry, she whispered again, her face crumpling with regret. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I didn't know how deep I was in until it was too late. I stood there, the weight of everything crashing down on me. My entire life, my career, my marriage was spiraling out of control. And the worst part, I didn't know how to stop it. The air felt heavy around us, thick with all the unspoken weight of betrayal, danger, and regret. I couldn't wrap my mind around the fact that my own wife, someone I had trusted with everything, had been the weak link in a game much larger than herself. As Sarah sat there, crumbling under the weight of her confession, I struggled to hold on to my composure. But inside, I was boiling. The name Luis kept bouncing around in my head like a warning siren. He wasn't just an informant. He was the key to our entire trafficking case. His intel had led us to major players, helped dismantle some operations, and had put us on the brink of a massive breakthrough. And now, because of Sarah's careless words, he had disappeared. I couldn't shake the feeling that his blood was on her hands, or worse, mine. Luis is gone, Sarah, I said, my voice quiet but filled with an intensity I couldn't hide. So he vanished off the face of the earth, and you're telling me that after you gave Tom details about the case, he asked about informants? Do you have any idea what that means? Her eyes widened, her face pale. No, I didn't, Jacob, I didn't know. You have to believe me. I didn't think. That's the problem, I growled, cutting her off. You didn't think. You were so caught up in whatever you thought this was with Tom that you didn't even consider what you were doing. And now Luis is probably dead because of it. She flinched at the word dead, but I wasn't holding back anymore. She needed to understand the gravity of what had happened, what she had done. I thought he just wanted to know about you, she whispered, more to herself than to me. He never said anything about using me for information, Jacob. He never hinted at it. I swear, I thought I was just venting about how hard it was to live this life with you always gone, always consumed by work. Her words stung, but I didn't care. I couldn't afford to care right now. All I could think about was how far this had gone and how deep we were both in because of her. You were compromised, I said coldly. You were a weakness, and he used that against us. Against me. Sarah's face contorted with guilt, fresh tears welling up in her eyes. She covered her face with her hands, sobbing, but the sound didn't move me. I couldn't feel sympathy right now, not when the stakes were this high. I paced back and forth, my mind spinning, trying to think of how to salvage this mess. I needed to know how much damage had been done and how much of my career and my life was now at risk. But more than that, I needed to know who the hell Tom really was. Do you have anything on him? I demanded. A full name? A phone number? Anything? Sarah shook her head without lifting her face from her hands. No, nothing. He was always careful. He never gave me anything concrete. I don't even know if Tom was his real name. I cursed under my breath. Of course, this guy would have covered his tracks. If he was good enough to manipulate Sarah so easily, he was good enough to stay in the shadows. And now, I had no way of tracing him. No way of figuring out who he really worked for, what his endgame was. But there was one thing I did know. This wasn't just about my personal life anymore. This had crossed over into my professional world in a way I hadn't seen coming. Tom, whoever the hell he was, had leveraged my wife to gain access to highly sensitive information about FBI operations. That made him a threat to national security, and it made me look like a fool. If my superiors found out, I could lose everything. My career, my reputation, my credibility would all be gone. And worse, they'd see me as a liability. In my line of work that could lead to more than just unemployment, I'd be isolated, blackballed, and if the wrong people were involved, I could become a target. I clenched my fists, my mind racing. I had to fix this before it spiraled further out of control. But how? Suddenly, the thought hit me like a punch to the gut. I had one option, one way to contain this before it spread any further. I had to tell my team. I had to come clean and let them know that Sarah had been compromised and that I had been the unknowing leak. It would be a disaster for my career, but it was the only way to get ahead of this before it blew up in my face. Jacob? Sarah's voice was small and hesitant. She was still sitting on the patio chair, her tear-soaked face staring up at me as if waiting for some kind of salvation. What are we going to do? I stopped pacing and looked at her, the coldness settling back into my chest. We're not going to do anything. I'm going to clean up this mess, and then I'm going to deal with Tom. Her eyes widened, fear flashing across her face. What do you mean, deal with him? What are you going to do? I don't know yet, I said, my voice flat, but trust me, this isn't over. Not by a long shot. I turned away, grabbing my phone from the kitchen counter. I was about to do something that would change the course of everything. I had no idea how deep this hole went, but I was damn sure going to find out. As I dialed my team leader's number, my heart pounded in my chest. This was it. The moment I'd been dreading. There was no turning back now. As the phone rang, each second felt like an eternity. My heart pounded in my chest. the weight of what I was about to do pressing down on me like a ton of bricks. I knew there was no undoing this once I made the call, but I had no choice. This mess had spiraled far beyond anything I could handle on my own. The line clicked and I heard my team leader's familiar voice. "Jacob, what's going on?" "It's late." I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need to talk. It's about one of my cases, and it's personal." A pause on the other end. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. "What's this about?" "It's about the trafficking case," I said, my voice heavy. "There's been a leak. Information's gotten out, and I think it's my fault." So the silence on the other end was deafening. For a moment, I thought he might hang up, but then he spoke, his voice cold and sharp. "What kind of leak? How bad is it?" I glanced over at Sarah, who was watching me with wide, terrified eyes. I turned away, focusing on the conversation. "It's bad. It's connected to my wife. She's been talking to someone who's been feeding off our conversations." I didn't know. I didn't see it until now. My team leader didn't respond immediately, but when he did, his voice was laced with frustration. "Do you have any idea what this could cost us? What it could cost you?" "I know," I said quickly. "But I'm telling you now before it gets worse. We can still contain this, but we need to act fast." Another long pause, then a heavy sigh. "All right, we'll handle it. But Jacob, this is going to get messy. You understand that, right? You're not walking out of this clean." I closed my eyes, the reality of my situation sinking in. "Yeah, I understand." "We'll run an internal investigation," he continued. "Figure out who this guy is, what he's after, and how deep this goes. But Jacob, if it comes down to it, we'll have to cut you loose." I knew what that meant. My career, the years of work, of sacrifice could be over, but there was no other way. "I get it." "Good. Sit tight. We'll be in touch soon." So the line went dead, and I stood there for a moment, staring at the phone in my hand. My stomach churned with a mix of dread and resignation. Sarah's voice broke the silence. "Jacob, what's going to happen now?" I turned to face her, feeling the weight of everything I had just set in motion. "They're going to investigate. They'll find out who Tom really is and shut this down. But for me..." I trailed off, not wanting to say it out loud. "But for me," I finally finished, "this is over." She stood, reaching out to touch my arm, but I pulled away, walking toward the door. I couldn't stay here, not with her, not anymore. As I stepped outside, the cool night air hit me, and I took a deep breath. This wasn't the ending I had imagined for my life. But then again, nothing ever goes the way you expect.